Massachusetts, 1912. The grave is where the town left him. Small stone, 3 lines, winter date. A mother stood there with both hands on the edge of the world and tried to learn the shape of silence. Then in late summer, a boy walked up the street with the same left-handed wave, the same cowlick that refused to be told anything, and said the line she had not heard in 8 months. "Ma, it's me. There is a way a crowd makes a room out of daylight." That day the town built a room and trapped themselves inside it. Some said it was a miracle. Some said she had lost her mind and found a stranger to live in it. The undertaker kept his hat on. The priest folded his hands like a man caught without an answer. Boy knew the chipped teacup. He knew where the floor creaked near the stove. He knew the nickname her brother had used only once, a name the dead boy loved and the living boy should not know. And yet there was a grave with his name on it. The grave did not argue. Graves rarely do. Before we unspool how a town can bury a child and meet him again, subscribe and tap the bell. Around here, we tell the stories most people would rather forget. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. These dark American tales are scattered across every state. Names are altered. Some records conflict. What follows is pieced from city dockets, parish books, a mill ledger, 3 letters that slept in a drawer for a century, and testimony from a hearing that changed nothing. Stay with me to the end. There's a pencil line in a burial register that turns this from ghost story to civic arithmetic. The Merrimack teaches towns to do math whether they want to or not. Haverhill and Lawrence learned first. Smaller places upriver copied their sums. Looms loud enough to bully thought. Boarding houses the color of boiled bread. Storefront glass that holds winter like a grudge. Call this place Millersford. 2 rail spurs, 1 Catholic church, 1 Protestant, an undertaker with a neat hand, a doctor with less neat hands but decent intentions. The city fathers liked to write growing in minutes when they meant crowded. Tenements leaked families onto stairwells. The river made its steady bargains. Labor for heat, youth for speed, breath for lint. The mills called themselves manufactories, as if the word could wrap gears in velvet. The Rooneys lived on Willow Court 2nd floor, 1 window that faced a brick wall and believed in it. Michael was a fixer of looms, a man who could tell a belt by the noise it made when it was pretending to be fine. Bridget took day work, mending, washing, sometimes sewing buttonholes until her eyes freckled with pain, and still she called it a mercy. They had 2 girls and a boy. The boy was Nathan. Nate, when he liked you. Bug, when his uncle came around with a pocket full of licorice and better stories than sense. He was 8 the winter the city wrote his name in stone. Nate's gifts were small and true. He could throw a flat stone so it would skip 2 times more than anyone expected. He could steal a laugh from a room that needed it. He could untie knots other hands had apologetically made. He did not know the shape of the word forever. January 27th, 1912. Morning cold enough to bite. The mills rattled awake. Michael left with his tin of tea, his shoulders set like a man about to pick up a building by the wrong end. Bridget sent the girls to school and told Nate to carry mended shirts to the boarding house on Pike Street and come straight back. "No river," she said, the line mothers say when they know a river has opinions. He nodded the way boys nod when they mean it, and also when they don't. A neighbor woman saw him near the canal bridge arguing cheerfully with a stray cat that didn't require his advice. A newsboy swore he watched a kid in a cap like Nate's climb the embankment by the West Weir. The postman thought he saw him near the corner where the cooper kept his barrels stacked like promises. This is how a timeline builds itself, from people who only knew later that they had been watching a clock. By 3, the shirts had not come home, and neither had the boy. Bridget made the house smaller with her pacing and then took her key and made the outside bigger with her fear. She asked on corners. She asked at the mill gate at shift change when faces stop being names and become proof of life. She asked along the river as if it could be reasoned with. At dusk, Michael and a dozen men with hook poles walked the banks for things no one wanted to find. The police said the river took what it took. The priest said God sometimes asked more than he gave back. The mill said the looms would not let the world stop for one boy. By midnight, men had lanterns in a row like a procession whose saint refused to lead. The night watch reported, boy lost, probable drown. He wrote the word like a man throwing it at a wall to see whether the shape would stick. 2 days later, a skiff man named Pottle found a body snagged in a winter bush below the weir. Small, coat dark with river, boots brown. On the left calf a pale scar like a half moon, a mark Bridget knew because she had kissed it once to make him laugh when he refused to put on clean socks. She fell to the ground and made a sound people pretended not to hear because they were afraid it would get in their throats and never leave. The doctor, call him Dr. McKendrick, did what men expect a doctor to do and what no sane person should have to, verified death. He wrote immersion and asphyxia. He wrote estimated 8 years. He wrote identification by mother and clothing. He did not write what he could not be sure of, the face too changed by river to be trusted, the weight wrong by a few pounds if his memory of the boy on the stair was any good, the smudge of a bruise on the right forearm that did not speak of a river's work. The undertaker, Silas Mayberry, prided himself on making a bad day look like a tidy room. He cleaned the body and combed what hair River left, and when the mother asked whether she ought to see the face, he said, gentle, confident, "Remember him as he was." He placed a brown cap on the pillow and folded small hands and added a rosary from his drawer, because grief is easier to carry when you're holding something. They held the funeral at St. Bridget's. The priest spoke about water and Jonah and how God returns what the sea borrows only when it suits him. The girls held each other in that way sisters do when they are trying to walk a parent to a door they cannot see. Michael stood without moving, a man trying not to make a sound that would keep happening once it started. They buried Nathan Rooney on January 31st, 1912. In a row where stones leaned toward one another as if gossiping or bracing. The undertaker wrote "interment complete" in a hand that had buried many children without losing its balance. Quick question: if a body is identified by clothing and a scar in a town where boys share coats and scrapes, how sure are we? What would you need to see to be certain? Drop your first theory below. In a few minutes, we'll read from a letter that the undertaker never mailed. One line that makes a mother's miracle look like a clerk's math problem. After the burial, life did the thing it does that feels like betrayal. It continued. Bridget returned to mending because the rent asked its usual questions. Michael went back to the mill because a loom will not accept grief as an excuse for a broken belt. The girls learned to say their brother's name at the right moments so that other people wouldn't, and they learned to walk by the river in pairs. Then spring arrived like an apology it didn't mean. The river thinned and ran faster. The mills closed for 2 days because the strike in Lawrence echoed like a shout up the line. Rumor lived in the city like a second weather. A child went missing in Haverhill and turned up in Fitchburg with a story about a man and a train and a promise of candy that never arrived. Newspapers found their stencil, "Child lost, found, confusion, mothers beware." August, the kind of heat that wrings a shirt while a man is still wearing it. A peddler named Griggs pushing a cart of tinware on the Salem Road saw 2 boys and a man near the trolley stop. The man had a coat too heavy for the weather, which is one way the world identifies a problem to those of us who need costumes to read a script. One boy asked the other, quiet and quick, "You ever been to Willow Court? You know Mrs. Rooney?" Griggs's ear was the sort that liked to collect details. He asked what business a boy had with a woman he named like a mother and none of his. The man tugged the boy by the arm. Griggs went stubborn and loud. The man went quiet and fast. In minutes, the boys were in two different directions, and the man was in neither. A patrolman caught one of the boys on the corner of Miller and Bain. Dirty shirt, left-handed wave, cowlick like a flag insulted by wind. "Name?" "Nate," he said, and then, as if the room had gotten smaller for him too, "Nathaniel Rooney." He asked whether his mother had made dumplings. He asked whether his father had fixed the belt that made the clack, clack, clack on the number 4. He asked whether the cat still slept under the stove as if it owned the place. He asked whether the teacup with the chip had been mended. He asked everything a dead boy has no business asking. Word travels in a town faster than water does. By the time the patrolman walked the boy to Willow Court, a crowd had formed around the building like a ring drawn on a map. The girls saw him first and stepped back as if they had met a ghost in a stairwell, and then stepped forward because their bones remembered before their brains did. Bridget came to the door with her hair pinned wrong and said the thing people in these situations say when they are afraid the world is about to punish them for wanting too much. "Who is this?" The boy didn't answer like a stranger. He said, "Ma, the red cloth on the table is wrong side up," and walked to it and turned it, and under it lay the place where the wood had burned a circle on the day he spilled tea and cried because it made a mark, and she had told him, "We'll hide it." And he had said, "Hide is not mend." She took his shoulders in both hands and rotated him like a small planet. She found the half-moon scar. She found time running in both directions and tried to stand in both. Michael didn't speak when he came in. He put his hand on the boy's head and tried to reconcile heat with memory, and failed. He said the oddest sentence a father can say to a child, "I put you in the ground." And the boy flinched, not at the word ground, but at the word you. Two facts insisted on themselves in that room. First, the boy had the habits of a boy who had lived in it. Second, there was a grave with his name on it. The room could hold both truths for only a short time before something was going to break. Undertaker Mayberry arrived because that's what undertakers do when a rumor behaves like a body. It needs tending. He looked at the boy as if he were measuring a box. He looked at the mother as if he were measuring a patience. He looked at the father and decided he would not look there long. Mayberry said nothing anyone could write down as wrong. He said, "Grief does tricks, and boys do too, and we must be careful with our words." He did not mention the line in his order book that read, "Child, male, estimated 8, no shore mark, draped." The priest came because people sent for comfort and because he had never turned away from a room that might ask him to stand still while other people needed to move. He held the boy's hand and asked a question that would answer only to one person. "What prayer do you say when you are afraid?" The boy said, "The one Grandma taught me, not the one you did," and rattled off a Welsh father's soft words that Bridget had kept like cut flowers in a cup because they were never meant to last, but they did. The police captain, Asa Blodgett, arrived because that is what happens when a town has to decide whether a crowd is a mob yet. He took a statement. He took another. He wrote, "Probable misidentification in January." He wrote, "Kidnapping possible." He wrote, "Pending confirmation." He avoided writing, "Resurrection," because even if the world offered it, a captain has to prefer words that can be stapled to a report. Quick check-in. If you were in that room, stone, grave, boy, what would you do first? Dig, test, or run? Drop it in the comments. In a moment we will dig. And the dirt won't just be soil. Exhumation is a word that does not belong on a household shelf, and yet there it was on a slip of paper. Order to exhume, signed by a judge who had no interest in ghosts and a keen interest in not being the man who refused a mother certainty. The cemetery keeper did not want to do it. The priest did not want to bless it. The undertaker did not want to see his January work again. The father did not want to be right or wrong. The mother wanted to breathe. They did it at dawn while the world had its eyes closed. Mayberry pried the earth with a care that looked like love if you didn't know it was habit. The lid lifted with the sound all lids make when they have followed their orders for months. Inside lay a small effort at peace. The blanket, brown, pilled with time and damp. The rosary on 2 small hands. The face no longer a face. Bones make their own decisions under soil. People rarely enjoy those decisions. 2 practical anomalies presented themselves to men who pay attention to practicalities. The boots were not the boots the boy had been wearing on the day he vanished. Bridget had mended his toe and cursed the way leather tells on you. These boots were whole. And the cap was not the cap a mother had kept on a hook in the kitchen after the funeral to remind herself that remembering is a labor. This cap had a maker's tag from a shop on the far side of the river where she had never set foot because the woman who kept it had a way of making other women feel unpurchased. Mayberry changed color the way paper does near a stove. He said, "Supplied as decency," which is an undertaker's phrase meaning, "I made a choice." He said, "The other boots were unfit." He said, I thought no mother should have to see that." He had a point. He also had a problem. The identification in January, now hanging on clothing like a lantern on the last nail, was no longer holding. They lifted what they had to and put it where the world says it belongs. The priest said the small words for big days. The mother stood very still, as if to avoid waking an animal, and then took the living boy home because the question had been moved but not answered. When a child returns from the grave, we ask him to prove he deserves to be alive. The boy sat at the kitchen table with a cup of watered milk and told his story 3 ways because 3 different men asked with 3 different faces. "I will give you all 3. To Captain Blodgett he said, "A man outside St. Bridget's watched me and told me a cart had tipped at the corner and a dog was hurt. I went. He took my arm. He said we would ride to the doctor. We rode to the train. He wore a blue hat with a wool seam like a scar. On the train he gave me to a woman who called me Tommy and said I was hers. We went to a farm with 100 chickens and not enough kindness. I slept above a kitchen where men drank. A boy called Minnie gave me a coin and said if I ran to the road at the bad corner someone would stop. I ran. The woman fell. I did not stop running. A man with tin pots yelled in a voice that felt like home. That is all." To Father O'Malley he said, "I was punished and sent away. I learned to keep my prayers under my tongue because the woman did not like the ones that were not hers. I saw a picture of a ship and thought about living on a ship so no one could find me. I dreamt of our floor being warm for once. A boy who limped taught me to wind the clock and to look at the moon through a bottle to make it less lonely. When I was too sad, I named each chicken after a saint and then forgot their real names so I could feel sorry correctly when one was missing." To Michael he said, "The man smelled like apples that were almost bad. The woman had hands like wire. They called me stupid because I asked to write my name and they said boys like me do not need one. When it rained, the chickens came into the kitchen and the floor turned to paste. I wanted to come home every minute you were not home with me. Sometimes I counted. I got to numbers I hadn't learned yet. If you've ever listened to a child told to perform his own life, you know what I know. A liar at 8 is a different creature than a liar at 30. This boy lied only where fear needs it. He told the truth where pain refuses to be rearranged. What do you hear in those 3 tellings? Kidnapping, placement, or something closer to a family's temporary abandonment no one wants to name. Drop your read. In a moment, we'll open the undertaker's drawer and read a letter he never sent. One line, one number, the beginning of an arithmetic that will haunt the rest of this story. Mayberry kept a drawer labeled unsent. Most men do, whether they use wood or memory. In it lay a letter addressed to the city clerk, dated February 3, 1912, 3 days after Nate's burial. It read, "Sir, on review of the January interments and vouchers presented for city poor, I find that child male, River, name unknown, tag U12, may be duplicated on ledger with Rooney, Nathaniel, family paid portion. I supplied decent garments and a rosary in place of petitioned clothing. The face was not presentable. Identification was by cap and scar alone. I ask whether, in such cases, the city prefers a designation of unknown, probable. Respectfully, S. Mayberry." No one had read it. No one had answered it. The city paid. The city likes to pay more than it likes to admit error because money ends a conversation and truth starts 3 more. Tag U12. 2 bodies with 1 set of papers? Or 1 unknown's tag accidentally attached to a known boy for the sake of a tidy page? The undertaker swore the grave opened in August was the grave he had closed in January. He swore the records were patched because some lines don't fall where you expect them. He swore and paled and said very quietly, "I am not a villain." The city formed a committee of concern. Committees in small towns are made of men who know how other men drink and prefer not to say so. They summoned the Rooneys, the undertaker, the priest, the patrolman, the peddler, and a woman who ran a home placement charity out of Boston 2 days a week, Eunice Hale, who spoke like a bell that had never been rung too hard. Eunice explained carefully that children from bad homes were sometimes placed temporarily with farm families for air, milk, and morals. She said it was possible the boy had been relocated by a zealot who forgot to make a ledger entry. She said her organization had no record of a Rooney placement and would never condone removing a child without proper consent. She said her organization had, however, encountered mothers who later regretted an arrangement they had greeted as a relief. Bridget stood and left the room because there is a place in a mother where words like that cannot be allowed to touch. The captain asked for names. Eunice had none. The peddler had 2. A man called Mr. Croom or Groom and a woman called Sally, who might have been Sarah but didn't answer to either. The patrolman had a time and a corner. The undertaker had an unsent letter and a moral bruise. The committee wrote, "Pending further evidence, the boy is returned to his family." They wrote, "The January identification is in doubt." They did not write, "Some of us do not like miracles. If you've stayed this far, you're my kind of listener." Before we press deeper, do you lean toward a misidentified drowning, a kidnapping masked by respectable placement, or something stranger? Tell me below. I'll pin a comment and circle back. Next, we follow paper where it hates to go, to a Boston ledger with a hole in it and a parish book with a pencil line that should not exist. Eunice Hale's charity kept better books than the city and worse hearts, or maybe the other way around. In any case, there was a ledger. In June 1912, a boy was placed for the summer with a farm family west of Fitchburg. Age written 8. Initials NR. The receiving family's name, Bates. The fee, none. The return date, September 1st. The field returned, left blank. A marginal note in a different hand. Bates says boy went home with guardian, no receipt. Underneath, fainter, something that looks like Mr. C. The clerk who made that mark had a way with letters that suggests someone taught her to be quick when she should have learned to be careful. What do we do with this? It links an NR to a practice that was common and is now discussed in softer tones. It also says, without meaning to, that a boy became paper, and then stopped being paper without anyone knowing whether he had become a boy again. If you're looking for a ghost, give it a missing receipt and watch it grow. Father O'Malley kept the parish book with a neatness his predecessor would have admired and his successor would resent. Under burials, January 1912, you will find the line everyone expected to find. Rooney, Nathaniel, 8, Merrimack, Mass and Interment, January. 31, St. Bridget's, and then, 2 pages later, where confirmations are listed in May, there is a half-erased pencil line that does not belong in that section at all, written small and straight along the inner margin where most eyes never glance. For Nathaniel, if returned, do not say we doubted, say we waited. Who writes that? A priest who refuses to be made ridiculous by grace? A man who couldn't bear the thought that he had said the wrong words over the wrong body? A clerk with a poet's petty grief? Pencil is for people who want to speak and be able to unsay. In that line is a town's secret wish, that waiting counts as faith. The town tried to teach itself how to hold a boy who had been buried and then sat at the kitchen table. The school made a place that had become a hole twice over. The girls learned to fight and then to stop. Men at the mill patted Nate's head and then walked away to make a machine feel something like love. Michael bent and fixed belts until his hands shook. Bridget watched her son sleep as if sight were a leash. And the boy? He learned to be looked at. He learned that people believe you more when you are quiet. He learned that being asked to repeat your own life makes you edit it, and that editing feels like lying even when it isn't. He learned to avoid the river and the trolley and men in hats that looked like the one in his story, and also men in hats that looked like none at all. We are not done. Next we track the man in the blue hat, the woman with wire hands, and a second grave a county over with a date that should be familiar. Then we watch a courtroom try to decide if a mother can be mother twice to the same boy, and we come to the part where, years later, a photograph is found that should not exist, of a boy standing beside his own stone. The peddler's detail stayed in my teeth. The blue hat, wool seam like a scar. A seam that thick is not fashion, it is repair. In 1912, there were 3 places in the county where you could get a hat reblocked and banded with wool instead of grosgrain. A barber who did favors poorly. A charity shop that took in men and sent out clothes flatter than mercy. And a mill storeroom where a foreman kept a drawer of oddments for men who couldn't afford to go bareheaded in winter and couldn't afford to buy pride. Captain Blodgett sent a patrol to each. The barber remembered a man with quick eyes and a face that had met regret without shaking hands. The charity shop had too many blue hats and not enough receipts. The mill storeroom ledger said only, hat, blue, rebanded, and next to it a name that could be Croom or Groom or Crone, the clerk having written it quickly enough to leave room for doubt. A mark in the margin, smaller than ink should be when it wants to be taken seriously. Asked for boys' sizes too. The habit of the blue hat man emerged in threads. He stood near churches on catechism days. He liked the corner by the trolley barn when pay packets were thin and mothers sent children to buy bread alone. He asked ordinary questions with a confidence that made them sound like instructions. He was seen, which is different from being caught. He was remembered as fog is remembered. You know it was there, you cannot pick it up. Eunice Hale's ledger gave us the county. The peddler's memory gave us a road. Farms west of Fitchburg were a lesson in almost enough land, almost enough hands, almost enough hope. We found the Bates place by the smell of chicken and the sound a barn makes when it is trying not to fall. Mrs. Bates came to the door with suspicion arranged on her face like a bonnet. She recognized Nate and did not want to. He's the one the woman brought, she said, and then, guilty fast. Only for the summer. The woman. Sally. Or Sarah. We called her Sal, like the salt she forgot to put in everything. Mr. Bates said one true thing. A boy is not a rooster. He does not thrive in a pen. What did they feed him? Porridge, milk when there was milk, eggs when the hens remembered their job. What did he do? Chores large enough to be called by a smaller word. Did they hit him? Not more than the times required, Mrs. Bates said, failing to hear herself. Did they intend to return him? We asked her to come for him. She sent word a man would. He never did. They feared the law enough to tell more. Sally had brought 2 boys that summer. One limped and answered to Minnie, which is what happens when a name like Minot meets a mouth that thinks laughter is medicine. Minnie left with a man Mrs. Bates called the Guardian, a word that worked like paper to make a wrong thing look correct. The Guardian had a blue hat with a seam like a scar. He called Minnie Tom, and it sounded like someone trying on a coat in the wrong size. The room went quiet around that word, Guardian. In 1912, a man could put it on the way he put on a hat. A paper, a tone, a church's nod, and you could move a child. The charity called it home placement. A mother called it winter. A boy called it the sound chickens make when you shut the door. If you've been listening to the bones of this, what basket do you put it in now? Kidnapping, bad charity with worse partners, or both? And what should happen to a man who wears the word guardian like a disguise? Tell me below. I'll pin a comment and bring a few century-old consequences to compare with your answers. Trainmen remember faces in pairs, the face that pays and the face that tries not to. The Fitchburg-Salem line conductor had seen our blue hat 3 times that summer and remembered, not because of the boy, but because the woman made him tired. She had hands like wire and corrected the man in a way that suggested she had earned the right to speak and then spent it on him anyway. She called the boy Tommy and stupid in the same sentence. The conductor had told her the car smelled of chickens. She had said it smelled of money. He remembered the name the man gave, Mr. Groom. He remembered a town the man preferred, Danvers. He remembered the boy looking out the window at a bridge as if bridges were invented to be counted. He remembered a moment. The woman dozed. The man yawned. The boy's hand twitched as if the thought of leaving had made it to the wrist and then lost courage on the way to the door. We asked about Danvers. The name drips a separate legend if you've read old court minutes. In 1912 it meant a place with farms, asylums, and men who bought and sold produce and sometimes children on the same routes. We found a lodging house that had taken rent from a Mr. Groom for 3 nights in June. He had paid in coins that smelled of restaurants. The landlady remembered the wire-handed woman, because some hands leave a scratch on a room. She remembered the boy crying without noise. She remembered the man saying, in a tone that helps no one, "Everything is agreed." In a county 1 hour south, a cemetery book held a line that bit. Unknown boy, recovered from river February. 1, 1912. Tag U12. The date cut across our story like a wire through cloth. The undertaker in that town was a cousin to ours by trade, if not by name. He read us his note. Brought in at night. Clothing poor. No claim. City paid. Buried municipal section. No cap noted, no scar observed, no family, no priest. 2 boys by water on the same week. 1 buried with name, 1 buried without. The ledger in our town had carried U12 like a shadow. Mayberry's unsent letter tried to warn the paper that it had learned a bad habit, to stack grief and call it one entry. Was the body in our January grave the unknown from the next county? Did the river play a trick with distance and time that paper should have corrected and didn't? We went to the second grave and stood in a weather that did not like to have people in it. We did not open it. There are times not to trade a stranger's rest for our need to be exact. But standing there told me something I can't make you believe with a ledger. There are more names than stones in American ground. A judge is a man who must pretend to have the right words. The Rooney case, so the paper called it, though it was not a case in the way a courtroom likes, sat in a small room with a large echo. The city wanted to know if it had made a mistake big enough to cost it money. The Rooneys wanted to know whether they were allowed to keep their own son without being suspected of stealing him from a grave. The priest wanted to keep his dignity. Mayberry wanted to keep his license. Eunice Hale wanted to keep her ledger unsplashed with town anger. And the boy wanted eggs and a pencil. They measured him with questions because they did not yet have the courage to measure him with a tape. He knew the word for the sound the number 4 loom made when the belt was wrong. He knew the place on the stair where Michael's boot had worn a shallow quarter moon. He knew the prayer his grandmother said with an accent that made God sound closer. He knew the joke his uncle had told once and regretted and told never again about a man who lost his hat and blamed the sky. The judge tried a new tool, recent science dressed in formality. He called a doctor who had read in a journal about blood grouping and its use in exclusion. The doctor pricked 3 fingers, placed 3 drops, and looked at them with a face that wanted to be the future and didn't like what the present was doing with his time. He said, "The father and the boy are not excluded." He said it as if it meant more than it did, which is how science is born into courtrooms and grows up too fast. The judge concluded what towns conclude when facts are a net with holes. The January burial was in doubt. The August boy belonged where his body fit into the furniture. The case of the blue hat and the wire-handed woman would proceed in Boston if anyone could be found to put in the dock. The city would amend its books without prejudice. A phrase that moves guilt from one ledger to another without ever showing where it first lived. If you were judge, what would you have asked that no one here did? The hat? The trainman? The charities list? Or would you have walked them all to the river to make the town look at the place it prefers not to? Tell me below. Next, we go looking for Mr. Groom in a place where men change their names as easily as they change their hats. Men who deal in children learn to be made of water. They take the shape of whatever vessel offers them coin. Groom, croom, crone. We followed him by the things he could not help. An appetite for poker he was not good enough to indulge. A limp that came and went depending on who was watching. The habit of keeping one hand always near the boy, the way a man keeps hand on a wallet when the street feels wrong. In Danvers, he was groom. In Woburn, he was crone. In Boston, he was something you wouldn't remember unless you owed him. We found a policeman who had moved him along from a churchyard where he had no business standing. We found a farmer who paid him $3 to find a helpful boy, and then found out the help was smaller than the work. We found a woman who called herself Sarah Greeley, with none of the confidence a real Greeley would have, and who had once been a laundress at a home for wayward girls, and learned there how paper fools honest eyes. We did not catch them. The story would prefer we did. It would like to show you a cell and a sentence, because that makes watching easier. Instead, we found small debris that proved they existed. A pawn ticket for a violin not theirs. A postcard from a man named Drew who might have been a partner. A hat, blue, with a seam, A photographer with a traveling backdrop took pictures on fair days for men who wanted proof they had smiled once. In 1915, he set up his stand by the river on a Sunday and made tin types of families posed with their best coats and their least unruly children. In a trunk that had no reason to be opened 100 years later, except that rooms are cruel to paper, there was a small photograph of a boy standing beside a stone with his name on it. Nathan, it said. The dates, the winter, the line about the river. The boy stood with his hand almost but not quite on the stone. Bridget beside him, steady. Michael behind, unsure whether he was meant to be larger or smaller than grief. The girls on either side, holding a space between them like they had learned to. Who took it? The photographer signed nothing. Why take it? People do what they must to make the world bearable. Sometimes that means holding two truths in one frame until your hands stop shaking. Mayberry did not sleep well for the rest of his life. He had followed the customs of his trade as best he knew them. He had substituted decent garments for indecent ones. He had allowed a mother to remember a face as it had been instead of seeing it as it was. He had also permitted a misidentification to grow roots. He began a practice that made other undertakers sneer and, in private, copy. Every child brought in without a sure name was photographed in profile and from above, hands and ears, a small bertillon borrowed and made gentle. Clothes were catalogued in a drawer no one else opened. He insisted that any charity placing a child in the county file a receipt with his office, which was not the law, but became a habit. When he died, the town wrote, respectable, and meant complicated. He had tried to repair with method what he had loosened with mercy. Nate grew into a kind of boy who stands in two doors at once, the past where he was supposed to stay, and the present where he meant to live. Teachers watched him for signs of lies and found only the ordinary ones. He learned to fix belts because his father had hands that had begun to stutter, and someone had to carry the house along the river. He learned to step wide around people who needed him to perform his return as entertainment. He did not marry early because men who have been buried do not hurry unless the house is on fire. He did not leave town because the river had to be watched. He learned the names of other boys lost and wrote them in a book because a ledger kept by a child can sometimes shame an adult one into accuracy. We've walked from a grave to a kitchen and back to a grave with a boy in the frame. Do you accept misidentification as the central gear, or do you still leave space for something the river prefers not to explain? Tell me. In the last stretch, we'll pull the threads tight, the committee's final word, the charity's quiet closure, and the pencil line the priest wrote on his last day. By 1916, placement had gone out of fashion in the city and into euphemism. Eunice Hale retired with her dignity in one hand and a box of unsent letters in the other. The organization changed names and kept doing something like what it had been doing, less boldly and more carefully. A memo in the last month of the old name admitted irregularities and volunteers acting beyond remit. In the margin, a tired clerk wrote, Sally, and drew a question mark that looked like a fish hook. The Bates farm took on a proper hand and stopped needing boys it could not keep. Minnie, the limping boy, turned up in a factory with a job his leg did not like and a temper the foreman learned to give room. He never used the name his mother had given him again. Names are clothes. Some of us change them because the laundry is too expensive, On the last page of the Parish book, Father O'Malley was allowed to write before age took his hand. There is a pencil line as faint as a breath on cold glass. It says, "A boy returned from the grave is a boy kept from it. Record him twice, or you will forget him." Once he handed the book to his successor with a nod and a warning. "Be careful with pencil. It is for hope. Ink is for stubborn men." We stood on the bank, me, you, whoever keeps vigil over stories like this, and we did the math the town had tried to avoid. One body recovered January 29th. One burial, January 31st, with a name on the stone and clothing supplied. One unknown boy, U-12, buried February 1st, one county south. One living child taken by a man in a blue hat in June and placed on a farm by a woman with wire hands. One escape in August. One kitchen where a mother turned a cloth right side up. One exhumation revealing a cap and boots supplied by an undertaker who preferred mercy to evidence. One boy measured by rooms that already knew him. The sum is not elegant, but it equals. If you require a phenomenon, keep a small drawer in your mind for miracles. If you require a culprit, draw a circle that includes a system, a charity with more ambition than guardrails, a man in a blue hat, a woman who knew the rules and learned how to step around them, and a river that carries secrets to people who prefer them to be solved on land. Years later, a young reporter wrote up the Rooney case as "the boy who returned from the grave." He made the prose shinier than the truth, the way young men do when an older grief flatters them by standing still for a portrait. Nate read it and did not mind the headline. He minded the parts where the reporter pretended the town had wanted him back without reservation. He carried the clipping in a pocket until it frayed. He used it to start conversations with men who like to act as if sorrow is a hobby. Bridget died with her son's hand on her hand, and that is the kind of sentence some people will say is too pretty for a town like this and for a winter like that. Michael outlived the looms by 3 years and learned to his surprise that quiet has a sound. The girls married men who could walk past the river without counting. Mayberry's drawer was found and read and used to make a small rule in a larger city. Nate grew old. He was never tired of not being dead, but he learned not to say so because it makes birthdays complicated. There is one more thing. In a courthouse basement, a file holds a complaint that was never served. Commonwealth versus John Groom, Sarah Greeley, aliases unknown, for the unlawful taking and conveyance of a child. It lacks a signature. The clerk who made it had a sick child that week and forgot to push the paper up the stairs to a man with a stamp. The complaint slept. The men did not. The town did what towns do when they cannot find the throat of the problem. They closed their eyes and tried to remember the sound of the kitchen when the cloth was turned and the scar found and the name said properly. I wish I could serve the complaint now. Names are useful only when they hold. Groom Greeley. The room that allowed them. The charity that made them plausible. The ledger that tolerated returned blank. If you stand by the gravestone with the boy in the photograph and wait for late wind to walk the river flat, you can hear a sound that is not water and not looms and not sorrow. It is the soft noise a ledger makes when it compensates. It adds a line it should have carried from the beginning. Boy, alive. Boy, returned. Boy, counted twice so no one can erase him once. If this reached you, subscribe and tap the bell. Tell me where you're listening from, and tell me which piece of the machinery you blame most. The river, the charity, the undertaker's mercy, or the blue hat. I'll pin the most persuasive comment and follow up with any documents we can pry loose from archives that prefer their quiet. Next time we leave the river for a road that never finishes. A highway surveyor who found mile marker 42 3 times in a week, and a farmhouse that did not exist on Wednesday but did on Friday. Until then, keep a light on and count the living twice.